It's Armageddon, Joe.
Yes. You're
Nuclear
back. Where were you?
Armageddon.
Where were you when Armageddon was being prepared? You were missing.
I was here. It's spirit.
Only your spirit animal, though. You're
Neil's flying unicorn was
rainbow,
here.
your rainbow unicorn.
I was here. Actually, I sent my Russian agent here on my behalf.
Oh,
Yeah.
Sergei,
You might have
yeah.
met him, Sergei.
Sergei, yeah.
What do you think of him?
Sergei was...
He's a doppelganger, no, for me?
Yeah, looks very similar, yeah. No,
No.
not at all. Yeah, okay, so you're...
Nuclear Armageddon, everyone's talking about it. Obviously, it's imminent. No, it won't be, because Elon Musk is going to save the world.
Right.
Yeah.
Elon Musk is going to resolve the Ukrainian conflict via Twitter.
He's calling for peace talks between Trump and Putin. I mean, between
Biden.
what's
and Putin.
Biden, that's his name. Yeah.
Sleepy Joe, yeah.
Yeah.
And?
Well, it's going great, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Obviously, you know, we're kind of outliers in that we don't get spooked by nuclear talk.
Yeah, for me, there's an element to...
Everyone does, because they're either new to it or...
Well, the way they're propagating it in the media, obviously it's something you have to talk about in a certain sense, and there is a kind of
It's
reality.
incessant.
Well, there's a reality behind that as well, obviously, because you're talking about two nuclear-armed nations, well, more than two, actually, but in terms of NATO nations and Russia. So you have to talk about it, but the way it's being talked about and stuff, it's not being talked about in terms of the likelihood of it. Of course, many politicians in the West have actually said it's extremely unlikely. They've said it over the past few weeks, extremely unlikely that there'll be any... nuclear exchange, that Russia would use any nukes or whatever, that any nuclear war, which I think is very close to the mark. But of course, that doesn't stop. That's just, you see the odd report of that, mostly on Twitter actually, but you don't see much in the way of media headlines saying, "Don't worry, everyone. Chances of nuclear Armageddon or war are extremely small. There's very little chance that Putin, if you want to frame it in that way, Putin would use nukes." Although that's being said, and it's obviously the reality of the situation, you know. But someone likes to spook the population, you know. What's better than COVID? What's better than a deadly virus? A deadly bomb coming to get you. So, I mean, it's that kind of crossover between the media's penchant for sensationalist headlines and selling newspapers and getting clicks and all that kind of stuff, and their irresponsible use of that, essentially. I mean, you can't, you know, there's going to be disinformation if your focus, at least to some extent, is on sensationalist headlines in order to get readers and get clicks and get attention. Basically, you're going to have to spin the truth in a dramatic way in order to get people's attention. So that's just the world we live in, you know.
Yeah. But I on this issue, I wouldn't just blame the media, because if you notice that what gives it legs are the, quote, more serious analysts, those who are either independent or, you know, less in it just for the headlines. They really do watch events closely, watch the news a lot, and many of them are, you know, kind of spooked by the disconnect they see between the ease with which the N-word is mentioned, including by Putin, in fairness, in his speech or two.
He didn't even use the
The
N-word.
disconnect between that, well, he didn't, but that was implied. The disconnect between that and the continued escalation and the rhetoric about, from one side about Russians and from the other about Americans, it couldn't be any worse. It's worse. It is worse rhetorically than it was during the Cold War. So they see that disconnect, and then they're trying to fill in the blanks. And many of them are like, they think they have the scoop. And the scoop is, oh my God, things have gotten so crazy that our leadership and their leadership over there don't seem to realize the fire they're playing with. That where this escalatory logic goes to is that nuclear scenario. So they believe they're filling in a gap that no one else, and so they want to grab I'm talking about the independent, not the corporate media. They want to grab your attention too and
Yeah, of course.
pull you into their serious discussion now about the imminent likelihood of nuclear
Well, that's
apocalypse.
Elon Musk is talking about that, and everybody's talking
Him,
about.
he's one, but he's not the
they're-
only one.
No, but like a lot of them are, yeah, even independent media and anti, people who wouldn't be necessarily in the Western camp or whatever. But that's a result of the media propagating it and governments propagating it,
Yeah.
and like that disconnect between the ease with which governments are using the threat of nuclear war. Apparently unaware of the implications of it. Well, obviously they're aware of the implications of it, and that says to me that it's just being used as propaganda, basically. There is the factor that both sides might be concerned that it can theoretically get out of control, and someone can. I mean, they did. Someone is someone going to push a button? Like, was Biden going to push? Biden, he'd fall.
No.
He might fall asleep on the button, or he might have dropped his ice cream on the button, and that would cause. But obviously, Biden, the White House doesn't play much of any kind of substantive role in implementing or formulating foreign policy at all, and hasn't done for a very long time. So you're talking about you are talking about the Washington establishment here. So you're talking about backroom people, and the same in Russia, obviously. Does anybody know exactly how the decision is? I suppose there's a formal chain of command about how a nuclear war would be unleashed, type thing, but. I think it's. I think they all understand there is a game being played here, and that more than anything else, if I had to come down on one side or the other, more than anything else, the whole nuke scare business is being used to, to keep populations in thrall, to keep them kind of shocked and awed, let's say, by that threat in particular. It's like, shut up, let's stop fighting over. Let's everybody just calm down. People even stop talking about it. Let's just. It's almost like saying like these issues, looking in detail at the issues about the rights and wrongs of Ukraine and whether or not the US is to blame for Ukraine, etc., etc. We've gone beyond that now. This has gone, this is serious.
Right.
We're all at risk here. This isn't just some armchair general chat we can have anymore. Our lives are on the line, blah, blah, blah.
So it's kind of the mushroom cloud is hanging over people as a kind of cudgel, as for a chilling factor to stop
Right.
them looking at the issue and the
Right.
interrelated issues
Right.
at all.
Right. And that's, I mean, yes, exactly. So if you assume, you have to assume that government interest is keeping a population quiet, compliant, in their place, basically. And the threat of nuclear war is very good for that purpose, So I think there's an element of, in the propagation of this nuke scare that's been going around for a little while, there's a big element of that in it, that it is propaganda against the masses to a large extent, and that there's no real seriousness. And that's what I say, there's no real serious intent on the part of actual people who might have their quote-unquote finger on the button. They're pretty sure they're playing a different game, basically. They're operating in a different reality, and that's true for this entire conflict. They're operating with a different set of parameters and a different perspective on the entire conflict, than what people pick up from the actual goings on. One thing that stuck out. I mean, I've been thinking about this week actually. That one of the things that stuck out to me when last week when we were talking about the attack on the Crimean bridge, which was obviously a bad idea, didn't really achieve very much, and just got Ukraine smacked big time in terms of its infrastructure and the Ukrainian people, deprived of electricity, water, etc. Just such a bad idea, for some kind of propaganda victory or something that lasted 2 days, 3 days maybe. Anyway, I remember that in about a week before that happened, there was lots of the US and other NATO countries all advised their citizens to leave Ukraine.
Right, I remember that.
And
Ukraine, period, not
yeah,
just Kiev. Anyway,
right, get out of Ukraine. And that was about a week before the Crimean bridge attack and the Russian response. Kind of suggests to me an element of theatre in all this. Not that it's all fake, but that there's a lot known by both sides of the intentions
ahead of time.
Of the intentions of the other ahead of time. So I mean, that would, if you follow through, it would suggest that the West, NATO countries, knew about the Crimean bridge plot and the attack on it, and knew therefore about the likely Russian response, or even had intel that said that this was. And in fact, there were reports. I don't have it, but there's a report actually in the media saying that Russia was planning the missile attack on Ukraine several days before the Crimean bridge attack. So it even opens it up to the idea that Russia knew that there was some imminent, there was intelligence chatter they were picking up of an attack that might come to fruition on the Crimean bridge, in which case we will implement our response, which will be this response. So it's almost like playing a game of chess. You know what the other person's series, possible range of moves are. Do you know what I mean? There's a limited range of responses that your enemy can take to your provocations or your attack against them.
Well, the Kerch attack was laid out as revealed by Kit Clarenberg, who wrote for the Grey Zone. Was laid the whole thing was fleshed out by British intelligence, who suggested it as a possibility for Ukraine to follow sometime this summer. Mind you, that was with missile strikes, so it wasn't exactly the same scenario. But it means, of course, these
really
things
matter.
are gamed into anticipating what the other side's going to do, such that when the bridge strike happens, they don't then sit down in the Russian Ministry of Defense and go,
what are we going to do with this?
Will we do this one and this one? I don't think that one. No, that's all worked out before. They know.
And they don't sit down and go, what will we do in response to this? They don't have to start it up from a blank sheet,
So just to flesh it out, and I suppose to cut to the chase, although you can build it up as you want, we're not saying nuclear war is something to just be dismissed out of hand. We're saying that most likely all leaders concerned understand that too, and that we're not about to go from the level of proxy warfare it currently is at right up to there. There are many other things possible in the meantime, and we're going to try and suggest one possible trajectory for the next stage or tack direction this thing takes.
The stuff there's something going on in the past few days, over the past week really. You have a significant build up of Russian troops in Belarus.
And how significant? I've got to figure some more tea.
70,000.
Nuts. 70,000 Belarusian grouped with 100,000 Russian. That's almost the volume of soldiers to start with.
That's all Belarus's. 70,000 would be all of Belarus's military.
This is a small country. What's the population of Belarus?
9 million.
No, it's small. Yeah, it's Belgium size.
Yeah. It doesn't really have a very effective military, which is why it has this close relationship with Russia. Russia basically is it's a protectorate. Essentially, Belarus is a it's a close ally, close ethnic, political, religious, everything ally of Russia, has been for quite a long time, and used to be part of the Soviet Union, obviously. So and on its position on the Russia's western border with Europe, obviously makes it strategically important. So there's no way Belarus was ever going to be an independent country, it'd be worse than Ukraine in a certain sense, This is it's in the Washington Examiner. They quote, who's this dude? They quote a dude, Jason J. Smart, who is 2010 Russia and Belarus lifetime ban for working against Putin. He's a special correspondent for the Kiev Post. Okay, anyway, so this is it. He says Russian troops pour into Belarus by the trainload. Of course, look down. If you go down to the first tweet there, that the Kiev Post correspondent, Kiev Post correspondent is quoting a Belarusian source, as it says there, but he says it's funny. I love that. I understand it, but I'm always amazed. It never fails to amaze me, the kind of like the rhetoric and the propaganda that they just slide in, like he says. But a known Belarusian source tells me Russian soldiers are entering Belarus by the trainload. They're traveling in cattle cars, So
And
are you sure they're not
the
going
doors are locked?
Are you sure they're not going to a concentration camp?
So they can't get out.
So he just blithely puts in cattle cars. Obviously, they're not traveling cattle cars, but whatever, you can call them cattle cars if you want. It should be. That's how propaganda works. You gotta
He's taking one for his side,
Yeah. And then there's a video down below that. Geo confirmed it's a Twitter account that just tracks everything by GPS. And they have videos and stuff of movement of armored vehicles, tanks, artillery, self-propelled artillery, etc., to into Belarus. So 70,000. Yeah, what's the point? Throw up Google Maps there, Scotty, just so we and hopefully you can. Yeah, that general area. So
Where? And by the way, just this isn't just a Twitter rumor. I mean, this is confirmed. They have.
Yeah, well,
Moved.
Lukashenko has been talking about this for the past week. About he talks about threats that they've aware of threats.
Yeah,
against
terror threat.
Terror threat. They're upping their terror, that the terror alert kind of system or their terror response, and that that NATO and Ukrainians are planning something. He said basically planning some kind of provocation. Planning
Yeah,
some
I
kind
have his remark.
Go
Do you want
ahead.
me to say it?
Yeah.
This is reported in the New York Times. Of course, they throw in their little bit of a twist in rambling remarks, whatever, reported by the state news agency Belta, or Belarus. Mr. Lukashenko said that work had already started on the formation of what he called a joint regional group of troops to counter, quote, possible aggression against our country, end quote, by NATO and Ukraine.
Yeah.
So it's open.
Yeah, it's actually in that article. Just put that article back up for a second, Scotty. Just go down to the text below. Yeah, those 4 paragraphs or so there. Given the worsening on the situation on the western borders of the Union state, which he means, but he's saying
Border
Belarus,
with Poland.
which is exactly, yeah. So he's talking about the worsening situation on the Polish border of Belarus. That's Poland. That's surely there's nothing coming from Poland, right? This is all about Ukraine, right? He says we agreed to deploy a regional group of forces of the Russian Federation and the Republic of Belarus. Strike in the second paragraph there, the one below. Strikes on the territory of Belarus are not just being discussed in Ukraine today, but are also being planned. Put that together with problems on the western border, that could only mean, of course, you don't have to necessarily put those two together, but one way of looking at it is that he's suggesting strikes on the territory of Belarus from Poland. Because if you go back to our map, the western border of Belarus is pretty much exclusively Poland, right? But then there's other interpretations of this where...
And isn't there a US base there, up there? I'm not sure. I'm going to try and find it here, but...
yeah, well, so other people are thinking that it's actually more about a threat from Ukraine itself, which would be in keeping with, the fact that this is a Ukrainian conflict. It's a conflict in Ukraine. Any attacks that happen will happen from the territory of Ukraine, which means they would have to come over Belarus's southern border, not its western border with Poland. So it's not very clear what is understood by the Russians and Belarusians here in terms of what the actual threat is for and why a large number of troops are being massed in Belarus, not just troops but all sorts of equipment and even air force, etc. Now people have gone back to certain people looking at this situation have gone back to the idea of, okay, this is actually in preparation for another feint, a second feint has happened in March on Kiev, right? So this is an attempt to draw Ukrainian forces away from the east, where Russia has, is planning to. Obviously, a big part of Russia's plan is to free or liberate, let's say, those 4 territories that are incorporated into the Russian Federation there a little while ago. It doesn't hold all of those territories. It wants to take all of those territories. It announced that mobilization about 6 weeks ago or so, or a month or so ago. And those troops, they're basically being trained in the ways that they need to be trained, and they would, in theory, be used to. So you're talking about 200,000+ troops, in theory, be used to deal with that situation, to take those 4 regions that Russia incorporated into the Russian Federation. But so one analysis could be that in response to that, in order to water down those troops, or the total number of Russian troops, including from the mobilization, Kiev/NATO, or Ukraine/NATO, really just NATO, is planning to, has been planning up some kind of provocation against Belarus, which obviously is, very important. It's hand in hand with Russia in this whole situation, and if they let it be known, or becomes known that it becomes obvious that they're planning some kind of attack against Belarus, and that pulls a lot of those troops away from eastern Ukraine that would be intended to free those 4 regions towards defending Belarus. So in a certain sense, it's either, and that could be a feint in a certain sense. So you've basically got dueling feints in a certain sense,
Yeah.
dueling theories of feint basically in this build-up of troops in Belarus. Either it's the Ukrainians feinting an attack on Belarus in order to pull Russian troops away so there's
From
less
the
troops
south
in
and
the east, or it's Russia doing another feint on Kiev in order to push to pull a lot of Ukrainian / NATO troops towards Kiev in order so that there's less in Eastern Europe, so that they can more easily conquer or complete the conquering of those 4 regions in the east. Which is it? And is there a possibility that this would? I don't think it's another feint. Basically, I don't. I mean, obviously you can do feints as many times as you want because feints are the person that you're doing feints against can never be sure that the feint isn't actually not a feint; it's actually real, right? So even though they had this feint
Around Kiev.
in March
Yeah.
that did draw a lot of troops towards Kiev and allowed the Russians to make a lot of progress in the east. I don't think they're planning to do anything with Kiev right now. I don't think they're planning a lot of the on Telegram and stuff. A lot of the pro-Russian channels would like to see Kiev taken, because that's the end of the war, right? Basically, once they've said it all along. Once Kiev is done, it's done. Once you take Kiev, it's the war's over. It collapses and everything's good. So they really would like it to be a situation where there's a push from Belarus south of Belarusian and Russian troops towards Kiev to take Kiev. But I don't think that's going to happen because that's not as easy as it sounds. So I think, in my opinion, it's more likely to be a situation where there's a known threat that has been built up over the past while towards Belarus from Ukrainian / Polish / NATO troops to start something there. And it could be a feint, it could be pretending, it could be real. But either way, Russia has to put troops. The threat is serious enough. Because the whole thing about a feint is you're not just pretending, you're actually putting a lot of troops and hardware in a certain area. And you can just take them away, in which case it's a feint, or you can use them. And the person who that's directed against does not know, can't know for sure. So the person has to respond to that buildup of troops, whether it's a feint or not. So that's basically what we're seeing now, 70,000 or whatever troops. Somewhere...
170. If RT is correct,
170,
it's 70,000 Belarusian and 100,000 Russian soldiers.
Yeah, it's hard to know the exact numbers. It's still ongoing, so it's not imminent right now, but there's something going on. The other aspect of this is that I think, based on this mobilization, based on the status of the war right now and how it's been going, that Ukraine is basically facing defeat in the near future. And its NATO masters know that it's facing defeat in the near future. And that Russian troops would, at a certain point, where there's a kind of more definitive collapse of the Ukrainian military, you would have Russia would be kind of have, to a large extent, freedom to move as far across Ukraine as it wants. But first towards Kiev, obviously, and along the south and stuff. And the NATO and the EU, US, basically, I think, especially Poland, has always had designs, because it's on their border, it's their strategic interest, whatever, had designs on Western Europe, especially since this war started, has had designs on Western Ukraine,
Western Europe.
On Western Ukraine.
Too,
so basically along the border with Poland there on the left, past Lviv, to a certain extent, however far into Ukraine. And of course, if they were able to... That might be another situation where you have an escalation of the conflict, where it becomes actual NATO / Polish troops moving into Ukraine, which is a big escalation because that hasn't happened yet. I mean, of course, everybody knows that NATO troops, Polish troops, US troops, there's quite a number of them in Ukraine for quite a long time actually fighting, but they're all under different flags, right? Or all under Ukrainian flags. They're not under NATO flag. But certainly, if NATO believed that it's all gone wrong, Inspector, and Russia was going to take and could eventually take all of Ukraine, possibly, or at least put all of Ukraine under its influence, Poland, under NATO stewardship, would probably want to take a chunk of Western Ukraine. But in that case, Belarus would be very unhappy with that. And by Belarus, I mean Belarus and Russia would be very unhappy with that, because any movement of a NATO country, i.e. Poland, or NATO troops, taking part of that western part of Ukraine, that means they're taking part of the southern Belarusian border as well. And that's a big no-no for Belarus and Russia, is any encroachment, because you're basically that's NATO moving even closer to quote unquote Russia's
Right.
borders, even though it's Belarusian borders. And Lukashenko said that there's no way we're going to allow any NATO occupation or control over any part of Ukraine that's on our border,
On a southern border, right?
on our southern border.
Well,
Because we
here's
already
a
have
question.
a problem on our eastern border
Is there any
or
evidence
western
of
border.
beyond what I mean, who the hell knows? Is there any evidence of amassing of NATO forces on Poland's border with Belarus?
That would all be kept on the lowdown.
Yeah. But it's interesting that the Russians freely advertise it. It's reported, RT, elsewhere. But the NATO side, stum, nothing.
Yeah, well, because you don't. I mean, the big secret here, the big thing, the red line in a certain sense for NATO is the thing they want to avoid doing until they absolutely have to, and they would really prefer to never have to do it, is have official NATO troops under NATO flag and insignia, etc., actively engaged in the conflict in Ukraine, which means actively engaged in conflict with Russia. That's, you obviously know that's the thing they've been absolutely trying to avoid. It's kind of like, I gave you the analogy the other day there, or today actually, of like me going out on, it's a kind of bit silly, but I think it's more or less appropriate, me going out onto the road, the public highway, and throwing stones at my neighbour's house. And by doing that, he cannot claim, I won't admit, and he cannot claim that it's actually me doing it, because I didn't throw the stones from my yard into his yard at his house.
Right.
If I do it from the road, it's public road. It's like, well, it could be anybody, right? Well, it's just some person on the road, right? Or whoever was walking on the road that day. That's who's attacking. But he knows, and I know, that it's me.
Mm-hmm.
But I make sure not to throw any stones from my property onto his property, only from the public road.
And then in
how ridiculous
anticipation,
it is.
I prepare for defense by watching the road, because that's where they're going to come from retaliation.
Right.
I won't say it was him
Right.
per se.
Right.
I'll pretend it wasn't him. So I suppose our point here is there's a lot more scope for more proxy warfare.
Absolutely.
Eastern Europe's a big place. Russia's border with all these countries is big. There's a lot more capacity in this for NATO war games.
Yeah.
NATO, smelling of roses. It stinks at this point, and most of the world knows it stinks. But it's still, it's passing off to its own audience anyway. Western golden billion. That no, we still smell of roses. He's the evil invader. He's the overt aggressor. We're just
Mm-hmm.
so.
Yeah. But
And you think this is imminent,
I think
or
it's
imminent being
it's contingent on
the next thing.
on the on the availability of most of those mobilized troops. And like I said, I don't know if I said that or not, but anyway, it's about 6 weeks to 2 months of training. not
for the reserves that were called up ostensibly
Yeah,
for
the
Ukraine.
partial mobilization.
Right.
That's the big thing. That's the change, the step or the phase change in this game. This is we're going into season 2 of Game of Thrones or Game of War in Ukraine. Soon, pretty soon, and it's obviously the mobilization of those troops is a big factor, and pulling kind of Belarus into it. And I mean, they all know this, so there's all this stuff going on in the background. They all see what's happening. They're planning, making their plans and maneuvering in different positions. They know it well in advance. I mean, they probably know with a fairly high degree of certainty what the next 3 months holds. And by that I mean Russia and NATO countries, leaders in those countries know pretty much how the conflict is going to develop, including escalations over the next 3 months. They know that now. They're just waiting until things get their ducks in a row, then take action, wait for the response, respond to that response, etc., etc.
Okay, now if they've just done that thing we said they were going to do, or we knew they would do, so now it's a go for
this.
the next thing.
Yeah, and see how they respond.
Yeah.
And
it has to play out that way. Everyone in Russia is like, just carpet bomb Ukraine already.
I know,
but
but people
they can't.
Nobody read the grand chessboard. I mean, this is stuff that's, and I mean, a lot of people, military historians and historians in general, any of them worth their salt, know this. You know what I mean? Because it's been going on for decades and decades. I don't know if you could go back a very long time, but certainly in the 20th century, the grand chessboard, as Brzezinski called it, for the kind of the Cold War. And even long before that, really, back into the 1800s, with the British, the Russian Empire, and the British Empire, it's all
Well,
known moves
yeah.
that
In,
provoke expected responses but
And
there's this little bit of maneuverability within it where you're not sure. It's like you want to see, more than likely that this is the way it's going to go out, but you just want to see because there's other factors that can come in that can kind of turn it in your favor. If you know what I mean, you're not absolutely sure. It's not very that controlled.
or the other way, so you don't want all the eggs in one basket right now, kind of thing.
Right.
You don't want to be caught going too bold, and then something unexpected.
Right.
You weren't
Right.
figuring in.
And while you're having these these wars, basically these conflicts, you're working in other areas to try and hobble your enemy in different ways, economically and in other ways.
You're meeting your allies and
Right.
telling them now is the time to stop using the US dollar.
Right, that kind of thing.
Wink, wink.
Blah,
you
blah,
know.
blah. Or
You
now's the time to put a cap on Russian oil, or now's the time to blow up that pipeline, or now's the time, and see what happens. So there is an openness, a certain level of openness about it, but in general, the broad plans are set well in advance, and you're never sure, as much as you can be sure, fairly sure that that your enemy will respond in this way. You're never 100% sure that they'll be able to respond in that way, or that other factors that you're working on won't impede them from doing that. So, in a certain sense, it's trying to game it so as to win-win. You know that you've gamed it out, and you see that this, then this, then this, then this, then this, and that'll be a good result. Because obviously, as we know, wars are racket and people are making money all the time just from the very fact of war. So it's a win from the very get-go. But if your other elements come into play, you could actually get a big win. You know what I mean? So it's a win or big win as far as they're concerned.
Right.
And that's why they love war.
Right. And yeah.
And people don't know that, and people are very naive, and it's just sad to see people commenting on it. I mean, the level of discourse on this on social media is just like
awful.
It's in the gutter. Like people have
awful.
no understanding. It's like kindergartners trying to analyze adult behavior, geopolitics or whatever.
Another datum, you mentioned that about 10 days ago, the Western governments recommended their citizens leave Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
Since then, 3 days ago, Russian allied governments did likewise.
Right. Well,
it came after Putin met with all of them, I guess. Kazakhstan.
CSTO.
I don't think it was CSTO.
Not
Well, it
all
was
of them,
CSTO
but
countries.
most of
It
those
was the
countries,
Stans, Belarus.
Well, in the
of course,
past few
but
days.
also China.
Yeah, in the past few days, China, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, obviously Belarus, the two, Serbia, who's not Serbia, and Serbia actually included not just advising their citizens to leave as soon as possible, but they temporarily closed their embassy in Kiev today, and Egypt as well said citizens leave. So it's a good kind of rule of thumb because it worked with you had NATO countries announcing that that suggestion to their citizens or to leave in about a
Before the
week
Kerch
before the
bomb,
Kerch bridge,
followed by the
airstrikes, the missile strikes across Ukraine. I don't know. So when countries do that, you know that it's a good kind of rule of thumb that
They know
something
that the
is
next thing is
fairly
about to be
soon.
played
Some
by
new
both
thing.
sides. Yeah.
I mean, it could just be another, but who knows when the next, like I said, a kind of phase change up to something a bit more dramatic, But again, still relatively controlled because it's known in advance, right? That's what scares people, is the idea of this wild card, you know what I mean? That a crazy person can just make a mistake and start a nuclear war. It doesn't really work like that, At this level, it doesn't. At this point in time and the point in history, that's not how it works.
And that's because of the very thing that they're shitting their pants over, MAD.
Mm.
MAD guaranteed there will be no more big grabs by anyone, no big sudden moves by anyone. Ever since 70 years ago, well, certainly since the Soviets got the nuclear technology. Under that envelope, it basically forced, it's primitive, but that's where human beings are at. It forced them to become more, I was going to say civilized. Geez, I don't know if that's the right word after the history of American wars in the last 70 years, but think about what worse things could have happened if they had actually deployed use of a toy. But when everyone else is locked in by the same threat, it forces far more pragmatic, step-by-step escalatory. And eventually there's always a settlement, peace of some kind. Usually a big money settlement. it locks it in.
Mm.
MAD is a factor here, but it means that it's ruling it out and forcing proxy war to continue as such.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The other thing you were telling me earlier, like, mate, you've already covered it, I think.
Mm.
The Belarus, why Belarus? Because it's another possible avenue for both Washington and Moscow to avoid having direct.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's just another possible
Mm-hmm.
war zone, and that's unfortunate for Belarus. But they know that. And
Right.
Lukashenko, obviously, I'm sure he would prefer that not be
Mhm.
the case. But can you go back to that Examiner article? That this last quote
Mhm.
was interesting as well. It seems blasé, like it was just thrown out there. But maybe we should believe him when he says it. The very last one, he says, "You read the first part.
Mm.
Here's the second part. Their owners, that'll be people really running Ukraine today. Their owners are pushing Ukrainians to start a war against Belarus to drag us there, Belarusians. We have been preparing for this for decades. If necessary, we will respond."
Yeah. So that's
Is that in hindsight? I'm just throwing that out there, or do we believe him when actually they've gamed these kinds of things
Yeah,
for
for
a
sure, yeah.
long time?
Yeah, of course, and that would, like I said, it's a feint to either draw Russian troops away, or it's a feint plus, if you know what I mean, or a real feint, if you want to call it that, where you actually follow through with your feint and you initiate some kind of conflict on Belarusian territory. This is NATO troops, NATO trained troops, and some NATO troops actually, attacking Belarus, forcing Russia to come and defend it, and opening, in a certain sense, another front. Because right now, despite everything you've heard, Russia has never been losing. Ukraine had its high moment there about a month ago or so with its retaking of land around Kharkiv and to a certain extent in the south in Kherson. That said, it's not going to. That was the best it gets for Ukraine, especially now with the partial mobilization of Russia and Russia kind of baring its teeth after the Kerch bridge attack. Russia is preparing to kind of wage this war in earnest, let's say, and to get on with things. The Ukrainians know that, NATO knows that, but they're not willing to back down. They should, at this point, cut their losses and salvage at least some of Ukraine as a kind of as the state that it is to a certain extent today, rather than because the future for Ukraine looks bleak if they double down, if they keep doubling down. But of course, this is being directed by NATO and primarily the US, and they don't give a shit about Ukraine, right? This is all directed at undermining Russia and hopefully, from their point of view, destroying Russia. So, as Biden said, well, he didn't say it explicitly, but it's interpreted as him saying they're going to fight Russia to the last Ukrainian. So they really don't care, and for some bizarre reasons, the Ukrainians are caught in this kind of reality bubble where they think they're fighting for democracy. They believe the narrative that the West has foisted on them, that you're fighting for all of us, you're the defenders of global democracy and freedom, blah blah blah. And of course, there's a lot of nationalism and stuff, but they're caught in that kind of like a bubble. And they can't see clearly. They can't see. They won't get out of their own way in a certain sense to save,
Save what can be saved.
save what can be saved of Ukraine and their own what they're supposedly fighting for, because they're going to lose it if they keep on pushing. It makes no sense to fight someone who's much stronger than you and get pummeled into the ground to the point that you're dead or something. You know what I mean? At some point, you just go, okay, listen, this isn't a good fight, and I should just go. But they're not going to do that apparently because it's crazy. Anyway, they're crazy.
Americans are noticing that. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, so I was just going to say that with them aware, the West being aware, the US being aware that this is in the near future, like Russia winning bigly, basically, they want to try and do anything they can to stop that from happening, to forestall that, and attacking Belarus, opening a new front for Russia to defend in Belarus would be a good idea. That's what they think.
Yeah, or to end up winning something that's a poison chalice,
Right.
Economically ruined,
They'll walk away.
militarily ruined
Yeah, but it won't be a poison chalice for America. It'll be poison for the
Russia.
Ukrainians.
for Ukrainians.
But America will just walk away. Europe will be left with a headache for sure. But even they will walk away as well, But Yeah, so the possibility in that situation where Belarus is pulled in by Ukraine slash NATO attacking Belarus, Belarus might decide if there's a lot of support or if there's a lot of, it's obvious that this attack on Belarus is being financed by Poland, or being encouraged from Poland, let's say, or being happening from Poland for a large part, at least in terms of the supply of weapons and personnel and all that kind of stuff, because Poland's been training all these Ukrainian troops. Belarus might decide to bring Poland into the conflict, in which case then NATO's brought into the conflict. So we're all waiting in that point. I'm waiting for that point anyway, where the mask is pulled off and the bullshit stops, and it becomes what it has always been, which is a direct war between Russia and NATO. You know, albeit limited, low intensity, let's say low scale, but still, it'll freak everybody out if Belarus, because if Belarus fires missiles or whatever into Poland,
And Belarus in quotes because it's going to fire a Russian.
it's
missile.
Russian. It's Russian,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
it's in the same way, it's but that would be Russia turning the tables and saying it's sauce for the goose, it's sauce for the gander type
You've
thing.
got HIMARS in Ukraine firing at us. So
Right. So we have
S-400 or whatever.
or whatever, we have weapons in Belarus firing into Poland, or even the Baltic states, who knows? And they can say, well, it's not us, that's Belarus doing that.
Right.
Just like you're saying, it's Ukraine that's shooting into Russia. Well, this is Belarus shooting into Poland. It's going to happen to us.
Right.
It's me on the street throwing rocks at my neighbour's house.
And of course, they've set it all up whereby, and Lukashenko played his part over the years, where he is the erratic, crazy
He's the crazy
dictator.
wild card
So Putin
dictator
can
guy.
go, well, he is a bit erratic.
Yeah. You shouldn't
as
have provoked
you've
him.
been saying all these decades.
You said he was crazy, and then you provoked him, and he started lobbing missiles into Poland. I mean, what do you expect?
Yeah.
I can't talk to him anymore. He's lost the plot. Like, he's really angry with you people. You people should stop.
Well, give me a realistic scenario for that provocation, though. We're talking about something coming, attacking Belarus from Poland. Or
No, from Ukraine.
From Ukraine.
But
the south.
Lukashenko saying this is bullshit. He's not playing Putin's game in a certain sense. He's allowed because he's the
He
crazy
plays
one.
bad cop and
He can say,
locks
listen,
it in it.
yeah, he can say, listen, it's this is ridiculous. Every one of these missiles, every one of these missile systems, MLRS or HIMARS, and all of the troops that were firing them into Belarus over the last few days, all came a few days before that from Poland.
And we watched them.
We
Here's
watched
the
them come
videos
from
of them
Poland,
coming.
across the border, maybe not even very far, 20 kilometers across the border from Poland into Ukraine, and then started lobbing missiles at us. You want us to just go, oh, that was Ukraine? Of course, that's what Russia has accepted to agree to go along with for this whole time.
But Belarus doesn't have
Belarus may not have to and may not want to, and Russia may not want it to either. Russia may up the ante, in that sense. Raise the stakes in that sense by putting it up to NATO to say, okay, listen,
to. And there are untold numbers of groupings. There's a major US base in the center of Poland, center-ish, Poznan. But there's, there are other groupings all along Poland's border with Belarus and Ukraine, obviously.
yeah, and way more than there were 9 months ago,
yeah.
Since this has all started.
It could be the Iran retaliation on the US base in Al-Assad Air Base in northern Iraq after Soleimani was assassinated. You remember that? They knew it was coming. They had fair warning. Troops were in bunkers or evacuated. Base was destroyed, but still no one died, officially anyway. It could be that kind of thing. Maybe not with a heads up. I mean, you would imagine that if one side knows, okay, that's what they're going to do next, then the US side will know. You would imagine they would try to minimize casualties or even limit them to zero. To do their part to avoid direct and therefore being themselves, NATO, US, being forced into a corner to strike back.
Yeah. No, they'll walk away. I mean, they'll take some damage and then they'll walk away. I mean, they'll blink, basically.
Yeah.
NATO will always blink. And in any direct contact between NATO troops, like, say, from Poland or the Baltics, wherever, but with either, Belarusian / Russian troops, it won't last very long. They'll walk away because they have no stomach for that fight. I mean, that's their red line. The red line is a self-imposed red line where they won't engage in any significant exchange with Russian or Russian proxy, whatever Belarusian forces, because they know they kind of believe Putin. And I mean, as much as all the demonization in a certain sense of Putin as this madman dictator, you know, he's increasingly stressed. The walls are closing in, just like on Trump. It's getting worse. He's failing. He's losing. You know, it's so much nonsense. But anyway, and it's making him crazy, and he's acting more and more rational. Well, okay, so that means that in a situation where if you escalate it any further, he's most likely to be the one, according to your narrative, to nuke the Western world.
Well, or short of that, to blow up and kill many thousands of U.S. soldiers in Poland.
Right. Or yeah. He's not messing around. You've said that he's not messing around. I mean, they admit that. As much as they say he's crazy and a madman, dictator and stuff, he's not messing around. He's a rational actor at the same time. And so almost by definition, that implies that they will back down, that they won't escalate if there's that kind of a direct contact, because that direct contact implies it makes all the rhetoric going on now about potential nuclear Armageddon even more real or more likely when you have, you know, an exchange of fire between effectively Russian territory and NATO territory. That's the red line. That's an attack on one is attack on all. That's Article 5 of NATO. That's where you have to all get together in a room and go, what do we do now? And have a talking shop and then go, let's just let's go away and think about it. And we'll reconvene in a few months and see what we think. That's NATO's Article 5, basically.
Yeah. Well, what happened in the Iranian revenge attacks for the assassination of Soleimani was that there was a kind of curveball that came in at the last minute that meant that the entire world focus of discussion for the next month until COVID came along later that month was not on the significance of the Iranians using homemade ballistic missiles to destroy an American base in occupied Iraq. That should have been a win, a propaganda / actual military victory for Iran. No, the whole world focused on the shooting down of the airliner,
right? Because
there'll be twists like that. There's got to be some propaganda out for the United States. You're right. I agree. They'll back down, but they'll back down in a way that the world's not talking about the fact that they back down. They cannot have people notice.
That's a
much
defeat.
less talk about. That's the
when Stoltenberg said recently that they have to win in Ukraine because a defeat in Ukraine is a defeat for all of us, which people assumed he meant a defeat for NATO. If Russia wins in Ukraine, that's a defeat for Ukraine and for NATO. And the Russian government actually said, well, that seems to be a tacit admission that NATO is directly involved in this conflict. And it's like, it's annoying to play these silly games. Like, it's so transparent, you know, but that's diplomacy for you, right? Anyway, yeah.
Yeah. Lost your thought there.
Yeah, what was I saying about that?
Let me just add something else
Go
in
ahead.
here. Do you remember Trump was pilloried one way and down the other for his pecuniary, materialistic, business-like application to, well, American domestic policy, but also like U.S. foreign policy, you know, talking about in terms of what do we get out of Syria? It's just sand and death, you know. Yeah, but there's a world order to uphold here. The other side was always like smelling like roses, but we have higher ideological principles, which you, lowly Trump, would never understand. But let's play this clip. This was on Fox News last week. This is a guy he's a recurring commentator on American TV. Retired U.S. General Jack Keane.
Oh, that dude.
Talking about Ukraine being a, quote, great investment for the United States. Let's have a listen.
There are people in the Congress, and some of them Republicans, who have always expressed some concern about spending, in terms of spending money on Ukraine. But you know, we've got a $6 trillion budget. It's actually larger than that by a few $100 billion, and we've invested, and I mean invested, $66 billion in Ukraine this year, and that's like 1.1%. And what are we getting for that? For $66 billion, what we're getting is Ukraine is doing the fighting. They are literally destroying the Russian army on the battlefield, which would set them back for years and deny them the ability to ever accomplish under Putin any of his ambitions in terms of taking back some of the Soviet republics. And by the way, if that happened, that would mean war with NATO and Russia. And the scale of that would be much greater than what it is right now. And the risk, certainly, of nuclear war would be much greater. It's something we have avoided all through the Cold War, a conventional war with two superpowers holding strategic nuclear weapons. So for this investment, I think it's well worth it.
There's a few things with that. So, taking back the Soviet republics, that's what he claims. That's the old narrative.
Well, that's propaganda as to Putin's intentions.
Yes, that
Partly.
Putin wants to recreate the Soviet Union, complete with communism, no doubt. But the Soviet republics, Ukraine, Belarus. Okay, so he can only be talking about like Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, because he said that Putin taking back Soviet republics, as in occupying them and incorporating them into Russia, would mean nuclear war with NATO.
Yeah.
So he must mean Europe. He can't mean obviously the stands, because like NATO's not going to go to war with any of the southern former southern Soviet republics, like the stands, Kazakhstan, etc. If he doesn't mean those, he must mean Western European ones. So is there any evidence that Russia or Putin himself, because he is Russia, apparently you can't say Russia anymore, you have to say Putin, that he wants to take Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania? Has he ever made any moves in that direction, or has he ever said that? Of course, that's just the bullshit narrative that they propagate, so it's not actually true. There's some other reason why they're fighting this war. It's not to stop Putin's designs.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't have any designs.
They have to project onto Putin an ideological vision because, well, there hasn't been one until he recently articulated something like it in a speech. And it doesn't mention conquering other territories. It does talk about Russisky Mir, though, the greater Russian world, which, the population of which is in some Eastern European countries.
Yeah.
But it's far more to do with economics. It's to do with Nord Stream. It's to do with the extent
Pipelines.
of Russian bilateral trade
Right.
that goes into
Right.
Eastern, Central, and even
There'll
Western
be an
Europe.
economic takeover of Europe, basically.
Yeah, so they
Taken
have to
away
put this
from-
ideological gloss
Right.
on Putin's intentions.
to give it an evil spin, basically, that people
Yeah.
don't understand it. Oh,
But-
that means he's bad, right?
But I think he could also simply have been referring to Putin just taking those 4 provinces. Even if it stops there, this is the bravado of what he was saying. We cannot let him even have those, because otherwise that means war. He seemed to be saying that there's no outburst except nuclear war, but that's bullshit. As we've just explained, they know that's bullshit. They'll walk away.
Yeah.
But the greater point and the simple point is that driving a lot of Americans nuts, especially the dissident US, is like, how much are we spending? We're spending, and every week there's more announcements of more money. It's like, we need investment here, you assholes. But okay, and he's like 66 billion. Well, it's
nothing.
This is nothing. There is
Drop in the
no.
ocean.
So what is the financial calculus that he sees?
Well, he said $6 trillion.
It's 6
They have a
trillion.
budget of $6 trillion. A budget for what? Is he saying that's the military budget? $6 trillion? I think that's overstating the military budget a little bit.
Definitely. So what is he referring to? It's greater than that. It's probably. He
It's-
probably has
it's
in
like
mind a kind of
medical care,
global
pensions.
No, global economic budget,
Oh.
economic/military.
So we could use all of that if we wanted, right? $6 trillion. We could use all of that to stop
It's a
Putin.
drop in the ocean of our potential
To
to-
throw a load of money, to print a load of money
to shape the world as we see it.
by printing money.
Well, that's the
They could-
unspoken part.
They could take those $6 trillion, right? Because what is $6 trillion weigh, Scotty? Right, it's pretty heavy, right? So imagine they took that in a plane and dropped it in Moscow, in one big lump. That would at least destroy the Kremlin.
At least.
And if Putin was inside, job done. That's pretty much the only way they have to destroy it. When he's talking about money and budgets, yeah, just the money. Just that's all you've got, because you don't really have any options for military military destruction or destroying Russia via military means. So you've only got money. So just drop the money in Russia.
His overall point, though, is that there's no great loss for us.
Well, yeah, of course.
We can keep doing this. It was similarly expressed by Lindsey Graham in the summer when he said with glee, can't remember who was over his shoulder, the situation, the status quo as it is now, suits us just fine.
Right.
We'll just keep sending.
Yeah.
And, Ukrainians are like a godsend to us because they're so fanatically, religiously even committed to killing as many Russians on their way down.
they
That's the
believe-
part he leaves out.
Yeah.
They're on the way down anyway,
And they
but they're going to
believe
take
us.
as many Russians with them as they can. Let's just, that in a greater,
Yeah.
in the grand scheme, the grand chessboard, there's no loss there for the United States.
It's awesome for people like Lindsey Graham and the Washington establishment, because to have a group of people, at least a political and military elite, who are so ideologically in line with the American, rules-based order and American freedom and democracy, because they have to spend a lot of time and effort. It's very difficult for them to kind of convince people in countries where they want to kind of like subvert the government, to get them into the Western camp, the Western mindset. It takes a lot of effort depending on the country, countries that they already more or less own, like most Western European countries don't have to try. But further east, it takes a lot, and there's a lot of NGOing and propaganda has to be input into the system to even get something started, some movement started, to look west, to stop.
Yeah. That's why Zelensky's a godsend, because he's a poster child, and they plastered him all over the planet. Be like him.
Yeah.
And it was literally said this week, Chrystia Freeland, Deputy Prime Minister of Canada, was at some, global development conference, and a journalist from like West Africa said, so you're going to sink all this money into Ukraine, and I'm hearing that to do so, you're going to divert the funds you would have been sending us over here. Does that mean you're like, does that mean we're saying goodbye or something like that? What about us? You had said you earmarked development aid in our direction or investment or whatever, and now it's all going here. And she basically turned around and said, yeah, you know what needs to happen? People in your country need to be like Volodymyr Zelensky. You need to rise up.
Work.
This is what you need to work for. You need to be as militant and committed to not, quote, backslide into being more pro-Russian or more pro-China.
Yeah.
This is the
Look west,
this
young
is
man.
why in their wet dream the world would be full of, would be led by Zelensky's everywhere, But the reality is they're rare, That's why they want to fill the entire info space with Zelensky,
But just
drown out everyone else.
getting back to what I was saying earlier on about I just remembered what the last part of that comment that I was making about Stoltenberg saying that if there's a defeat in Ukraine, or a Russian victory in Ukraine is a defeat for Ukraine and for NATO, effectively. For them, it's existential. But it's not a defeat for NATO, obviously. It's only the appearance of a defeat for NATO, but the appearance of a defeat for NATO is catastrophic for NATO. It's the optics, most of what the West runs on, like we've said many times before, is propaganda and look how awesome we are. Like just, freedom and democracy, and we're great, talking themselves up, right? Of course, with threat of force behind it very often over the past, 100 years, but they talk a lot. They talk a really good game, basically, and they rely as much on the impression of American, in particular, American might, American military might, American economic might, as they do on actual measures that they can't coerce people, So for them, it is kind of existential because they realize that's a big part of their position in the world is just talk, propaganda, and the fact that other people believe that propaganda, other people in the world believe that propaganda, which sustains the West. So if they were to lose that image,
and that the key part, that the dollar is
right,
gold, is the gold
paramount.
standard.
Yeah. So if they were to lose that, if their image was to become seriously tarnished by the understanding or the acceptance of most people around the world that NATO just lost. NATO was fighting in Ukraine, fighting Russia in Ukraine, and NATO lost. NATO wasn't the US, i.e., and its allies were not up to the task. That's a big come down in prestige and belief among people around the world in their prowess and their ability to enforce what they say they're going to do, and to force people to do what they say they should do. It's amazing how much that belief plays a part in this whole situation, and that's why they're fighting so strenuously for it. It's not so much because a lot of people ask the question like, why are they so invested? You know what I mean? It's just this country, Ukraine. It could just go back to Russia. Half of it could go to Russia. Half of it could go to become part of Europe, and then just let it all go. Why you keep fighting?
The common sense position was articulated by Musk this week.
Right.
He's like,
No, they can't
why don't
understand.
you just let them have a referendum,
Right.
which we internationally observed, and we'll see what the will of the people is, and then we'll split it 50-50 based on the will of the people.
And Russia was
that's
on
just
board
common
with that.
sense. And fucking Lindsey Graham weighs in and replies to him on Twitter to lecture him about the ways of the world. You
Yeah.
know, no. You don't ask the will of the people. He didn't say that, but that was implied. No.
But Russia actually said that they were open to his suggestion. You know what I
Right.
mean? They just went, yeah, okay, let's talk about it. So they were open to that idea, but the West absolutely not, because that's still a defeat. And it's amazing how the extent to which the belief amongst the ordinary people in the world supports the current paradigm. Let's say the current global power structure and the current imbalance of power in the world. And that's what they're fighting for. So it is real. It's weird. And we've talked before about the idea of their information war, and how information for them is an extremely important part of any conflict. And that speaks to the fact that it's about what people believe. That what people believe becomes a tangible reality. It creates a tangible reality. And the lack of belief then does the opposite. It does away with that reality, or it can seriously erode that reality, which has then tangible results in the physical world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
NATO planes cannot be seen falling out of the sky. That's why Syria diverted into a dirty proxy war.
Right.
Because they had the capacity, when they were all weapons go in 2013, to carpet bomb. But at the last minute they went, we don't have air superiority,
Yeah.
But they only do it when they have guaranteed air dominance.
Yeah. And yes, somebody said, I turned on the flamingo. Exactly, I turned on the flamingo. That's very observant of you, who are somebody called BS. It doesn't mean bullshit. But, yeah, so anyway, there's apparently, just so you know, there's a new, the monikers, O, and what was the other one? Wasn't Z, so obviously Z, but Z and O, the different,
V.
and V. There's a new one for the groupings in Belarus. It's a triangle with a 2 in the middle.
Okay.
So it's like season 2.
Right.
So
Well, meanwhile, no one's confused about the Ukrainians because they're painting Wehrmacht stars all over across on their tanks.
not just that. Well, yeah. Check out this guy. I haven't seen him. I suppose he was on the front of Time magazine, I think, not too long ago. But for most of the course of this war, maybe he wasn't the commander-in-chief for the whole war. But anyway, he's the commander-in-chief now of the armed forces. Basically, he's the dude making all the awesome decisions, right? This guy. And that picture is actually from his Twitter account. He has a Twitter account. I don't follow him, but I keep an eye on him. And on his wrist is a bracelet. On his right hand wrist is a bracelet. This picture is from his. He posted this on Twitter. But you don't have to do that, Scotty, because I got it here.
Swastikas.
Well, that one right there, yeah. I think that it's a small thing, but that's pretty clearly a swastika. One of the little different symbols, and people looked up the actual bracelet, and you can find it or whatever. It's got different insignias all along, but one of them was actually a swastika. So, that's just one example, one more example, and this is the commander-in-chief. So, does Ukraine have a Nazi problem? Probably.
October 14th was a holiday in Ukraine, certainly in the west of Ukraine. it's the day of the celebration of the creation of the OUN UPA, which was Bandera's pro-Nazi faction.
Mm-hmm.
Stay behind unit, whatever.
In the Second World War, yeah.
And they're all walking down Lvov, torch-lit parade, swastikas,
On
Heil
display.
Hitler, Slava Ukraine. It's like it's on the streets. They're still, yeah.
Talking about propaganda, this one came out this week as well. We've seen others over the course of the past 7 or 8 months, but this was put out in response to the Russian kind of missile attack there after the Kerch Bridge attack. This was in the papers the next day because of they fired 100 and some whatever missiles, different types of missiles, cruise missiles at different, the power generating stations and different places. But and they did it over a few days afterwards as well, to a lesser extent. But there was lots of reports about evil. Obviously, it was spun as evil Russia bombing civilian infrastructure, bombing civilian homes, etc. And this video, just play it there.
Чуєте? Я не знаю. Віталій, сфотографуйте мене. Андрій Андрійович. Я зараз сфотографую. Припад в Росії.
Notice that lady there, right?
Uh-huh.
And her taking a picture of herself and saying, "Will you take a picture of me?" And somebody's putting on bandages and stuff. So then this was in response to this was the media. Well, not this, obviously, they didn't show this, but what they showed us is this next one, and one example of what they showed. But just keep that lady, remember her?
Vlad's bloody payback.
That was that's the New York Daily News, but there's also, it was across, a lot of them picked it up.
Rains death across Ukraine.
Yeah,
Rains death. Officially, Ukraine said 11 people were killed.
Yeah.
11.
And then the next one is the Italian newspaper,
Right.
Corriere della Sera, picked it up as well. You also had French, Liberation, no less, all using the same lady.
The strategy of terror.
And just to finish the series, last one is a Swedish newspaper. Same lady, there she is. And so people are absorbing that,
Do you think that's like full-on crisis actors, fake blood, or are they injured people who were being used by Ukrainian military forces? I'm just trying to cover the bases there, because that might also be the case. So they actually have suffered from, I presume the building they showed next to it was the Samsung building, big glass skyscraper, was hit.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it was hit by the Russians, though, or an actual Ukrainian air defense missile that went astray, because there were a few of those. But either way, look, they say 11 dead, right? It's so low that the Telegraph, I don't have it to
play that
hand.
video again.
Okay, let's watch it again.
Чуєте? Я не знаю. Віталій, сфотографуйте мене. Андрій Андрійович. Я зараз сфотографую.
Like someone who's seriously injured. Is that what you do? I mean, it's possible, I suppose, but at least it brings up a question. You know what I mean? You get blood all running down the front of your shirt. Your whole head has been bandaged. This guy standing beside you, he's in bad shape, and the first thing you do is take out your phone and say, "Would you take a picture of me?" "No, I'll do it myself. Hang on. How do I do the selfie?" "Okay, I'm going to put that on social." Really?
I sent it to my sister in Russia. I'll show her what that asshole Putin did.
Yeah, I mean, and then the way the media portrays it, bloody payback and stuff.
Rains death.
She at least isn't playing the part of someone who's just had death rained on
An
her.
innocent
You know what I mean?
bystander, yeah.
I mean, so it's just there's a question mark over it at the very least, right?
Yeah. Well, here's another sicko interpretation. She really was injured.
Yeah.
But
Which
there's such a large volume of people in Ukraine, not a majority, but a lot of Ukrainians who are so ideologically into hating all things Russia that they instinctively and voluntarily play their part in doing whatever for the country, for the greater good of the country. And the Western press is there, click, click, click.
At the very least, if that's the case, she's not very badly injured. Because someone who's very badly injured can't do that. That's not
Agreed.
what they're thinking about, right? So she's not badly injured. And maybe there was more bandages put on than were necessary or whatever, but she's not very badly injured if that's one of your first impulses is to, got to get this on social media,
Yeah.
Really?
Send to my
Wouldn't you
sister.
be, if you had a seriously bad head wound like that, wouldn't you be a bit, just want to go to hospital? I mean, really? I don't know.
Agreed.
It says there's something very strange about her in that sense if she's doing that. She's a very strange person.
100%.
Um,
So yeah, 11 dead from those massive airstrikes. Raining death. Bullshit. It was such bullshit that what they had to do, I think it was on the Telegraph, they ran a story where the headline was, what did it say? Something like, the gist of it was Russia's cruise missile strikes all over Ukraine were so poor and ineffective, they only killed 11 people.
which is it?
Which is it? It's precision surgical strikes in the real sense, where they're actually trying to avoid civilian casualties, but take out strategic targets, or their bombs suck because they're Russian, because they're losing the war so
Both.
bad.
It's whatever works for the propaganda war, Neil. You gotta, blanket
and whatever shit sticks in people's brains. We'll go with that. Okay.
Yeah. Do you see there's just on this topic because you wonder, there's a question over what the Russian, at least in my mind, has been for quite a while, a question over what the Russian troops actually think they're fighting for. What's motivating them? Do they need motivation? I mean, for the Iraq War, Afghanistan, and really everything since then, although it waned after a while. But you can always get troops to go and do what they're trained to do, which is go and fight a war. But usually they need some kind of a justification. You need to keep it, even for military personnel, you need, and that's no disrespect to military personnel, but they need to have
A war aim.
They need to believe.
It's
in
what
a certain
American
sense. It's
troops
for good,
in
right? You're not
Afghanistan started to ask their superiors.
Right.
What are we doing exactly?
Right. Well, they had 9/11, right? Which was a big.
Yeah, but
initially
15 years on, it was
Right.
like, what are we doing, sir?
It's starting to wear a bit thin,
Yeah.
but initially they had that. So Russian troops, what are they being told? This is relatively recent, right? So it only started in February or March. So what do Russian troops believe that they're fighting for? What are they doing in Ukraine? They're probably smart enough or intelligent enough to know that it's they're aware to some extent of the geopolitical aspect of it, and this is an attempt by the Americans to overtake Ukraine and threaten Russia, right? That's enough. But there's another element which was voiced by this guy. This is part of, I don't know who I don't know who they are specifically, but I don't think they're, what are they called, mubniks, mobilized personnel. They look more like regular, active military personnel rather than part of the mobilization or partial mobilization. But you can just have a look at what he says here.
Ah, yeah, I saw that. They're Chechens.
Oh, they're Chechens, are they?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you sure?
Well, he is for sure, yeah.
A lot of them in the ranks there don't look like Chechens.
No beards.
No beard. No, the guys he's talking to don't look like Chechens.
Okay, well.
But maybe he's just a Chechen commander who's... Because the Chechens don't... Holy war.
Люди, которые говорят, что их Бог это сатана.
People who say that God is Satan.
Люди, которые нам навязывают, что мы с вами должны ходить на ЛГБТ-парады, что у нас дети должны быть непонятно кем, ЛГБТшниками, чтобы у нас были гей-парады. Я считаю, что мужчины, которые находятся здесь, это именно те мужчины, которые ни в коем случае не хотели бы видеть своих детей на гей-парадах. Мы именно те мужчины, которые не хотели бы видеть, чтобы наши соседи,
Their world and their
наши
society.
друзья, мы являлись частью ихнего мира и ихнего общества. Мы не являемся таковыми. Мы люди, для которых есть мама,
We are people for whom
папа,
there's a
семья,
mother, a father,
Бог,
God, religion, and
религия,
everything else
всё,
that the
что
Almighty
нам
gave
дал
us.
Всевышний.
That's the
Вот
whole
и вся
point.
суть.
Yeah, I agree with Syrian Girl's comment on that. The ideological lines of World War III have been drawn. Yeah, it's been articulated in Putin's speech
that-
and also by others in
Yeah,
Russia.
for sure. And it's obviously been taken up by the troops.
Even holy war term was
Right.
used,
Um,
not by Putin, but by someone close to him.
A lot of American conservatives would agree with that.
Italian voters just voted for a prime minister who agrees with that.
Right. So Are they aware of it, or is that it kind of?
Oh, it's coming.
Is that information being
Slowly catching monkey.
that's
I
what-
see them
that's what
turning.
Russia's fighting for?
Cernovich on Twitter, like
Hmm.
they're starting to put the pieces
That
together.
one video alone, if that was taken by anybody in America, an American conservative watching that and taken as a general attitude or general belief among Russian troops, that's what they're fighting for, they would start to have serious problems disagreeing with it or supporting their government arming Ukraine against those guys. You know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
those people basically share the same beliefs as the average American
Yeah.
conservative.
Yeah,
Not that they
the
would
Russian
necessar-
there just said we're fighting for our way of life. Now
Right.
that's obviously been a trope of the American rationale that is told to its soldiers and the families of soldiers to support the
Right.
troops. Why? Because we're fighting for our way of life. And
Right.
Biden will use that term over and over again.
Right.
But what has happened these last X number of decades? Whose way of life exactly?
Mm.
Has something happened in the West where it's the way of life of the people in power is markedly different
Right.
to the way of
Well,
life
yeah, exactly.
of most ordinary people.
Well, it is, obviously, on a very practical level.
So it's for our way of life. And Biden will say likewise, it's for our way of life.
Yeah.
Okay, what is your way of life, Biden? Is
Mm.
it like, telling sexually suggestive things to 14-year-old girls,
Mm.
encouraging them to be actually adulterous or, promiscuous?
Yeah.
Are those your values? Because you don't share the same values with most people you claim voted for you.
Hmm. Yeah. This goes back a long time before this anyway. This is the genesis of this was probably obviously before that, or that belief system, that attitude, that way of life, or that perspective on life is has been amongst certainly people in eastern Ukraine, maybe even a lot of people in all of Ukraine for a very long time. Because they tend to be more religious, Christian, conservative types people in Ukraine, but certainly in Crimea and in Donbass, this image is a poster that was created in 2014 to represent the struggle in Donbass.
Okay, so probably in the center you've got a Yuki.
Yeah, Ukrainian. And the choice is facing him basically of on the right, obviously, Mother Russia, and on the left, Mother Russia represented by
Satanic West on the left.
Mother Russia represented by an angel, and
Hitler,
development,
Satan, EU
family.
flag, LGBT flag.
Yeah, that's basically
And drugs down the bottom.
Yeah, on the
Syringe.
right. On the right, you have a little angel boy, basically family, traditional family, technologies, this Soviet astronaut, and then history, of the Russian history, basically, and Christianity, obviously at the top of the crosses, contrasted with LGBT, Nazism, devils, drugs, and money. So they have it pretty
Is that-
clear,
Is that too binary or is that
Well, no, but
essentially correct?
I don't. To me, it doesn't. In a certain sense, it doesn't really matter whether
Binary.
it's
That
actually,
word is now tainted.
Yeah,
'Cause-
exactly. Yeah, be careful how you use that. To me, it doesn't really matter. It's just instructive or interesting that this is the way they see it.
That's how they see it.
how they see it, and that's what they're fighting for. And they're not for budging. It's for each person to decide to what extent that's true, or that image or those collection of kind of motifs there represent two different ways of seeing the world, or two different ways of being that are extant in the world today. And if that is that struggle between those two sides is actually taking place. I mean, I'm not going to tell everybody that's what's actually taking place. I'm just saying this is what some people believe, and certainly it's at the center of, for a lot of people, of what the Ukrainian conflict is about, with basically Russia versus the West, and. So a lot of people believe it. You can say it's nonsense, but that's the core. That's what's sustaining a lot of people in terms of their fight and continuing with the struggle.
Putin's speeches now always include, besides the more boring economic stuff, which actually is super interesting, but anyway, a discussion about values, our values, their values, and the contrast. And he brings this stuff up all the time now, regularly. And he includes the caveat that he's aware that in the West, a lot of people don't. That when their leaders speak and act on their behalf, they don't share the same values.
Yeah, Macron said this just this week as well. It's about 3 days ago. Macron urged Putin to do what?
Euronews, Ukraine war, come back to the negotiating table, Macron tells Putin. Yeah.
Is that
yeah,
something you tell someone who's losing?
Right.
I mean, if you're the enemy, Macron is ostensibly, obviously, the enemy, and France is the enemy of Russia and totally against what Russia's doing. Do you tell your enemy rather than in the jaws of defeat, to come back to the negotiating table, or do you just let them be defeated and then you get what you want?
Right. Exactly. It's the closed bubble of Western reality. In the real world, Lavrov again reiterated in a speech last week that he would like peace talks, and he's open to it with Kiev or Washington or both or whoever.
Yeah.
They do that all the time, and it was picked up. They don't just ignore those. It was responded to by Pentagon or State Department spokesman John Kirby. He said, "No, I'm not going to. No, that's not a serious offer. Just dismissed it out of hand."
And if you're winning bigly and your enemy is losing bigly, do you try and get your friends to launch a preemptive nuclear attack on your enemy if you're winning? Is that from a position of strength? Because that's exactly what
Zelensky did this week.
yeah.
Yeah.
Повинна робити НАТО. Унеможливлювати застосування Росією ядерної зброї. Але, що важливо, я ще раз звертаюсь до міжнародної спільноти. Як це було до 24-го?
Scotty?
Превентивні
Camera's still on
удари.
me. It's not on the screen.
There we go.
Що повинна робити НАТО? Унеможливлювати застосування Росією ядерної зброї. Але, що важливо, я ще раз звертаюсь до міжнародної спільноти. Як це було до 24-го? Превентивні удари, щоб вони знали, що з ними буде, якщо вони застосують, а не навпаки. Чекати ядерних ударів Росію, щоб потім сказати, ах ти так, ну ось тримай від нас. Переглянути застосування свого тиску. Ось я вважаю, що повинна робити НАТО. Переглянути порядок застосування.
Such a nut job, that guy. This is what NATO should do. Basically, don't wait for Russia to nuke us. You nuke them first.
He's nuts. I love Tucker Carlson's response to him. Go away, you troll.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's insane. But it speaks to the existential. It truly is. It's not really existential for NATO. It's more in a psychological, institutional sense, but it is existential for Ukraine. Kind of for Ukraine under that kind of regime, where Nazis have access to power and guns and can do whatever they want. Basically, that kind of Ukraine is seriously. He's so insane. I think you suggested it before. He would rather risk a nuclear exchange and see who comes out of it alive than settle for anything less.
Mm-hmm. Well, he's got nothing to lose at this point, which is dangerous. He's basically gone all in as the war president who's going to save Ukraine. And if it looks like he's not going to save Ukraine, then he will suggest anything and try anything and everything.
Nuke Moscow now.
Yeah,
before they do it.
Yeah. Because he's going down basically. So, and that's on the cards. Pretty in the relatively near future, I think.
Yeah. Well, he's out on a limb. He's insane. He's insane he's insane certainly to France. Macron also said this week that even if Russia, there's a twist in this as well, but he said even if Russia uses some kind of nukes in Ukraine, we will not retaliate by nuking Russia. For which he got blasted at this NATO summit by Ben Wallace for saying, "You idiot, don't show your hands, never show your hands. You must say to Russia, there will be severe consequences," i.e. you could use nukes on Russia if they use them first. But yeah, it's okay. So it's a last chance saloon for Ukraine,
Right.
right? What about Europe more generally? Because they're saying the right things. The economy minister of France this week said, look, the outcome of this war cannot be that we've just supplanted dependence on Russian energy for American domination of our economy. And then said, friends do not sell gas to other friends for 4 times the price they were paying before.
Right.
But
But
he
makes
knows the
American-
situation. He
America's
knows
not
what he
different.
doesn't want, but that's exactly where it's going. They blew up Nord Stream 2 to lock in
Mhm.
a captured market for the United States. And you're going to pay gas or freeze/starve.
Yeah.
You know, they cannot get out of it. It is kind of existential in that sense for Western Europe as well.
Yeah.
It's tragicomic. What do you do? I heard some noises about I think it was Scholz, leader of Germany, saying the time has come for Europe to. They've said this hundreds of times before, but he said, "No, now I'm serious. The time has come for Europe to have its own military,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but
i.e.,
that's-
break our dependence on the United States."
this is the.
But they're tethered to the US.
Yeah. Well, this. I mean, there are people who know what's going on. I mean, this is a report from it's a organization called the French School of Economic Warfare, which is supposedly known to be close to French intelligence, and it was like basically a short video montage, whatever infomercial they put out, that makes it clear that it's kind of like their view of what's going on in the world and from a French perspective and what needs to happen. You just have a watch for it there. Talking about energy crises and who is the enemy.
Nous ne sommes pas une puissance qui considère que les ennemis de nos amis sont forcément les nôtres.
Soit on collabore, soit on est pour un monde ouvert, soit on ne l'est pas.
L'ennemi, c'est pas la finance. L'ennemi, c'est le chômage.
Si tu veux la paix, prépare la guerre. Eh ben non, si tu veux la paix, prépare la paix. Il ne faut pas avoir peur.
Tout va bien.
Le président Macron, ami ou ennemi?
The jury's out.
American war machine against France. Shadow Wars. So they and the last at the end, they're to no longer be naive, you know. There's obviously some realism still among French and French think tanks, I suppose, as political and economic and think tanks linked to French intelligence. They kind of have a bit of sense still, and realize that it's not about goodies and baddies and stuff, and it's nowhere near as simplistic as governments and the media would have us all believe, you know. So I don't know. Is it? It's too late, I think, to turn around. Like, in answer to your question, it's too late for Europe to turn around really to any great effect. You know, they're still doubling down. They can't break away from America. They haven't. There's no dissent in European major European nation states or governments dissenting against the U.S. dictates around Ukraine and Russia, basically. You know what I mean? I mean, it's all obviously
There's none among the parliamentary class, but
Yeah.
there is among the people.
Yeah, for sure among the people. Yeah, but yeah,
I mean, the protests, people are waving Russian flags and asking for negotiations for, a turnaround in the whole thing. And that's where it's going to head to.
Mhm.
Putin's predicted this. Basically revolution or revolutionary environment.
Yeah.
in which they're going to demand it.
Yeah.
So far, they've said, I mean, to hell with it. No, you're all wrong. We know what we're doing. And they've made sure elections always go the right way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, ever westward, ever pro-America. But French intelligence, they included in that there's a little snippet of Burkina Faso. There was so it must have been very recently made because they had video footage of protesters in support of the military coup that took place there 10 days ago, in which, yes, there were large crowds of people waving Russian flags. Why Russian flags in Burkina Faso? In sub-Saharan Africa, what the hell?
No.
What does that tell you? Russia isn't even there yet. And ordinary people in Burkina Faso recognize that that's where they want to be ideologically and economically aligned with.
Mm-hmm.
Today happens to be the anniversary of the assassination of Burkina Faso's first and only independent leader, a guy called Thomas Sankara.
Mm-hmm.
He was assassinated in 1987 by someone from actually among his own group, entourage, who said, no, we need to get this country back to a close alliance with France. At the time, this other guy was trying to get them away, more pro-Soviet Union, he was self-styled Marxist, pro-independence, finally get our country off its knees and out of colonialism. Boom. This other guy comes in. He only passed away or resigned from office a couple of years ago, 2014 maybe, in massive protests against that dictatorship. So Burkina Faso,
it's a bit.
Who is the enemy? Well, who is the enemy for them?
Yeah.
They are sick of French neo-colonialism, where they have to use the European currency, and everything's dictated to them by France, what they can and cannot do.
Well, France is and other European countries are having to eat a bit of humble pie as far as African countries, especially North African countries, are concerned. Because, like for example, Algeria, apparently it's the third largest supplier of gas to Europe. There's pipelines coming across the Mediterranean into Spain, from Algeria, and France hasn't got a very honourable history with Algeria, obviously, and was very rude to them even up until fairly recently. I think Macron earlier this year even said something before, it was in January or something. He was talking about Algeria, and he asked the question. The question needs to be asked: did Algeria even exist as a state before French colonisation? That kind of arrogance.
We brought you civilization.
Yeah, basically. But now, 9 months later, he's going over there cap in hand, kowtowing to try and get to try and secure some gas supplies from Algeria, because they cut off Russian supplies, because, well, nobody knows. Well, because they're crazy. So, yeah, and then, of course, this week, or just about a week ago or so, Saudi Arabia agreed with Americans not happy about the fact that Saudi Arabia kind of more or less did a deal with Russia under the aegis of OPEC Plus, to cut oil by 2 million barrels per day starting on November 1st, which, Americans not happy about it for really crass reasons, which is the midterm elections in November, because by cutting 2 million barrels of oil from production, OPEC Plus, i.e. more or less, Saudi Arabia and Russia will drive the price up. And of course, it's in their interest as oil producers to drive the price up. Because, and I think I might have talked about this before, but the obvious reason is that they've been talking, European Union and America have been talking about putting a price cap on Russian oil only. It's delusional. I mean, it's bizarre that they think they can put a price cap on one, the biggest, the biggest exporter, I think, of oil in the world. They can put a price cap only on that country's oil. So that everybody who buys that country's oil will only be allowed to pay a under market value price, well below market value price, like say $70 or something like that, when it's actually current market value price would be like say 110, 120, only pay 70 for Russian gas. And that's not going to affect other major producers like Saudi Arabia.
Right.
Who are selling at 110, 120.
Yeah.
And
Russia, they see the writing on the wall.
They say, well, that applies to us by definition, because we'll have to reduce our prices to compete with Russian oil. Yeah. Therefore, it's a price cap on our oil as well. So you know what we're going to do in response? We're going to cut production of oil to drive the price up. And then you can put your price cap on it if you want.
Yeah.
And Americans not happy, only because price of gas at the pump will go up, and that'll be blamed by clueless American voters on Biden, because if price of gas at the pump is up under a certain administration, then it's his fault.
Yeah, they nearly always lose the upcoming election or midterm,
Based on
depending
price
on
of
the
gas.
timing of this. There's actually a follow-up story to this. This is the Daily Mail, but the source is the Saudi government. The Saudi government explained that the Americans knew the cut was coming, but all they asked was that it be done after the midterms, literally
Right.
just for that reason.
Yeah, yeah.
So here's the report in the Daily Mail. Biden administration, and this we only know this because the Saudis said it publicly. Biden administration urged Saudi Arabia to wait until after the midterms and warned, the US warned Saudi Arabia that rejecting the offer would be a clear sign of siding with Russia.
Yeah.
So they did that
So they
knowing
don't care about high oil
the
prices.
threat. That-
Just
well,
not right now.
There's a threat in that. Like,
Yeah. Well, the threat was supposedly they're going to stop, or they're talking about stopping, but they can't go that far with Saudi Arabia because Saudi Arabia has a lot more clout than the Americans would like to believe. You know, they talk about basically cutting. The only thing America provides for Saudi Arabia basically is military equipment, basically weapons, and the only thing they could come back with was threaten to cut off military supplies to Saudi Arabia. I don't know if they're going to do that or not, but it's interesting though. The only thing that came out of it, I didn't hear anything about whether or not. I don't think they're going to go through with it. And the only thing I heard as
the
a
oil
follow-up,
price cap.
no, the only thing I
No.
heard as a follow-up to that debacle between Saudi and the US
Right.
is that Saudi Arabia, in response, you know, to this counter threat from America, that they'd stop selling them weapons if they didn't, if they went ahead with their oil production cut.
But then you're pushing the Saudis into Russian arms.
Exactly, but the Saudis responded. The only response I heard was that just yesterday or today, they said that they announced that they were sending $400 million
Yeah.
worth of humanitarian aid to Ukraine.
To Ukraine.
It's like, is that enough? Is that okay? You happy now?
Right,
Can you
right.
see now we're not siding with Russia here? You're accusing us of siding with Russia. We were
Right.
just doing this for economic reasons. You're claiming that we're siding with Russia and that what are we now, an enemy of America or something like that? Well, here, look, $400 million, but only of humanitarian aid. We won't send any of your F-16s to Ukraine.
Putin spoke about the oil price cap at some energy summit in Russia and cited Milton Friedman back to them. This is I don't think people know who, but obviously Milton Friedman is like the prized, you know, he's like the Adam Smith of Reaganomics, you know. They've been lecturing the world nonstop about, you know, the money supply, free markets, you know, minimal government interference. You don't do, you know, caps on wages and prices. That's socialist. It never works, you know. It always backfires on you. So he cites it back to them and says, and he gives us the anecdote that Milton Friedman gave, which is that if you want to create a shortage of tomatoes, for example, just pass a law that retailers can't sell tomatoes for more than 2 cents per pound. Instantly, you will have a tomato shortage. It's this, and Milton Friedman said this: it is the same with oil and gas. End quote. Putin then quipped, "Let me remind you that Milton Friedman passed away in 2006. He had nothing to do with the Russian government and cannot be designated as a Russian agent of influence."
Yeah. So the cap, the US-EU cap on Russian oil and even gas now, they're talking about cap on the Russian price of
Well,
oil.
Putin went on to explain, he was talking to a global South audience, and he says, will it end there? Will they start to do the same with other raw materials that they get from you on food?
Yeah.
They'll say...
And cause effectively a shortage in it because people...
across the board.
But
And they'll pay you with their dollars and the euros that they're printing rapidly.
Right. But Putin has said that specifically. He said that any cap on Russian gas or oil will mean that we will stop supplying that gas or oil to those countries.
Point blank.
Ergo, a shortage
Yeah.
to the people who won't pay the correct price for it, the market price.
This looks like a standoff that's going to happen. I think it's the cap is due to come into effect in early December, and Putin gave his answer. We are not going to sell it if anyone demands that, because
right
it's
in the
too
middle
much.
of winter.
Yeah.
Right at the beginning of winter.
Someone's going to back down. Probably. Well, we'll see.
It's nuts. The whole thing is bonkers. Is there anything other? What was it? I saw a comment there, Scotty. But you can't scroll in the comments, can you? Me. I saw a big comment on something to do with Russian casualties, but Can you read it? No.
Yeah, that was a guy who posted twice. It said, the most conservative American estimate of Russian fatalities is 25,000. The British believe it is higher, on the order of 30 to 40,000. Other European countries are estimating even higher, with Ukraine claiming over 60,000.
Mm-hmm.
For every death, between 2 to 3 others are wounded severely. It is very likely that the majority of the original 200,000 members of the initial invasion force are either dead or missing body parts. This is not something for anyone to gloat over. Life is precious. We must consider the blood of these tens of thousands of Russians to be on the hands of one man, V. Putin.
Yeah, whatever.
Also on his hands are the blood of perhaps 10,000 dead Ukrainian soldiers, as well as another 15,000 wounded, along with at least 30,000 dead women, children, and old folks.
Really?
The cost of defeating evil is a lot of treasure and blood.
That guy supports Ukraine, and he doesn't agree with anything
Well,
we're saying.
yeah, because then there's a Ukrainian flag at the end.
Okay.
Oh, right.
Well,
Slava Ukraine.
he's-
Slava cocaine.
And he posted it twice in case we missed it the first
Okay.
time, just to...
That's how it got your attention.
Slava cocaine.
No, it's more like 15,000 dead on the Russian side, but 2/3 of which are local militias, though. So
Right.
about 5,000 Russian regulars.
Yeah.
The Ukrainian side is actually more like 100,000+ dead, plus twice that in injured. So yeah, no.
Yeah, you can't have it both. Again, these people seem to want to have it both ways. You can't have Russia going slow and, avoiding, basically the reason they're going slow is because they're avoiding just a blitzkrieg across the country. You can't have that and also have a large number of military casualties. Do you know what I mean? In the case where they did go full into Kiev at the beginning, or just try to do a shock and awe and then just swarm the country, yeah, you could have a lot of dead. But they seem to be they planned it specifically to avoid that. So it just doesn't make sense that. I mean, by all accounts, and this isn't just pro-Russian commentators complaining about how slow Russia was going. This is the West saying that Russia is going very slow. It's stalling. They're not really making the progress that they thought they would made, and not necessarily because they were being pushed back against, but simply because they were just going very carefully, like stopping, waiting, holding territory and stuff. You can't have that and have a large number of military casualties. That's not the way it works out in war. You know what I mean? You have a lot of casualties when you go on a suicide mission, basically. You know what I mean? You just charge against the enemy's guns and then you get wiped out.
Like the Ukrainian forces.
Yeah,
Every
pretty
day,
much.
every
It's
week.
more like them are the ones who would have the really high casualty numbers. Anyway, so vaccine season. Are you gonna get your booster?
My what?
Your booster. No?
No comment.
No comment. That might be seditious.
I'm one of them there. Vaccine hesitant.
You're vaccine hesitant. I'm a bit hesitant still. But Neil, it's been freaking almost 3 years, like, you know what I'm saying?
I know, I'm still here.
I know, but you're that's a long time to hesitate, like.
Yeah.
You're not just shit or get off the pot type thing.
I'm still waiting. I'm
Still waiting to see.
Still waiting to see how this experiment goes.
See how the trials go.
I'm in the control group.
Yeah, in the real life,
Yeah.
real life trials. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
in the control group.
Somebody has to be in the control group. Like, no, there was a thing. There was big hoo-ha this week on social media and stuff about it was a Dutch
MP. Yeah.
Dutch MP, and well, we'll just listen to him here just for a second. It's not very long. He just fleshes out the. He's actually talking to Pfizer, a Pfizer representative in the Dutch, European Parliament probably.
European Parliament.
In the European Parliament. So he's a Dutch MEP in the European Parliament questioning a Pfizer rep on their vaccine and specifically on whether or not it was tested for transmission, if it would prevent transmission, the vaccine. Go ahead.
If you don't get vaccinated, you're antisocial. This is what the Dutch Prime Minister and Health Minister told us. You don't get vaccinated just for yourself, but also for others. You do it for all of society. That's what I said. Today, this turned out to be complete nonsense. In a COVID hearing in the European Parliament, one of the Pfizer directors just admitted to me, at the time of introduction, the vaccine had never been tested on stopping the transmission of the virus. This removes the entire legal basis for the COVID passport. the COVID passport that led to massive institutional discrimination as people lost access to essential parts of society. I find this to be shocking, even criminal. Please watch the video until the end. Voor u, mevrouw Small, heb ik de volgende vraag waar ik een duidelijk antwoord op wil. And I will speak in English so there are no misunderstandings. Was the Pfizer COVID vaccine tested on stopping the transmission of the virus before it entered the market? If not, please say it clearly. If yes, are you willing to share the data with this committee? And I really want a straight answer, yes or no, and I'm looking forward to it. Thank you very much.
Regarding the question around, did we know about stopping immunisation before it's entered the market? No. We had to really move at the speed of science to really understand what is taking place in the market.
Is that?
This
Warp
is scandalous.
speed.
Millions of people worldwide felt forced to get vaccinated because of the myth that you do it for others. Now this turned out to be a cheap lie. This should be exposed. Please share this video.
Yeah. Does anybody care?
Well, yeah, 13 million views now, that video. Fact checkers, sponsored by Facebook and the Atlantic Alliance, are now claiming, no one ever claimed the vaccines would stop transmission. That's ridiculous. And then in return, people are posting hundreds of videos of Burla, Biden,
saying precisely that.
etc. All of them said exactly that. So
if you get the vaccine,
they lie so easily and effortlessly.
If you get the
can't
vaccine,
talk to these people.
If you get the vaccine, you will not spread it. It'll stop with you. Remember your woman Rachel Maddow? It'll stop in you. It can't go on any further if you get the vaccine. You are amazing. And the weird thing is, sure, they're talking about a vaccine, and there's literally no evidence whatsoever for them to say that. Where did that claim come from? Do you know what I mean? Pfizer, who made this vaccine, did not test it at all in any way, shape, or form to determine whether or not it stopped transmission. So how were we inundated with that message for guts of a year or 6 months anyway? Who made that up? Someone said tell people that it stops transmission. And then they go, well, what should we tell people that it stops transmission? Because do we have evidence that it stops transmission? No, actually, we don't have any evidence whatsoever that it stops transmission. Well, tell them anyway. I mean, what's the thought process behind that? How did that happen? I'd like to know how that actually happens. I mean, because it exposes the fact that at least that part of it was entirely manufactured. It was like someone consciously and deliberately made up a falsehood, a lie about the effects or the qualities of this vaccine that it did not have.
Oh, a lie. Really, Joe. Come on. We're moving at the speed of science.
Oh, sorry. Because we're moving at the speed of science, it's not a lie.
Speed of science, man.
I know.
It was a pandemic.
Yeah. People were dying. And people never died before that.
And remember, get your booster today.
They're still doing it.
While stocks last.
What if you change the tagline of NewsReal to "Moving at the speed of science"?
Yeah.
Maybe like YouTube can't ban you anymore.
Yeah.
No. Yeah. Speed of science. Yeah. If I see any more on this, I'll be banned from the internet.
Yeah, but they're moving ahead with it. In European countries and stuff, loads, particularly old people, going out getting their dual flu and COVID mRNA jab, double whammy. Right now, basically, end October, November, everybody's been booked in. Get your double vax, and this is for This is at this point for a mutated version of this virus that is really a nothing burger. It's a head cold, if you.
Bill Gates said last week. YouTube.
Bill Gates said that last week. Well, did he say it last week? He said it quite a while ago.
Recently, yeah. Well, recently.
Yeah. So why would people get vaccinated against something that really is?
Because it's COVID, Joe.
But it's not COVID. That's the problem. You see, calling it COVID brings people back to March 2020. But it's not. You can't. Why would you call it's like I can't think of an analogy, but why would you call it something that was, let's say, quite deadly, at least to a certain demographic, almost 3 years ago, that has now mutated to something very benign, that is like a little puppy dog? Why would you use the same name for those two things? Like, Cerberus and a puppy. They have two different names because of the vastly different qualities of both of those canines. You shouldn't refer to a puppy as Cerberus.
You're so antisocial. That's what...
COVID! It's the COVID. Cast your mind back to early 2020. Remember the fear. Remember the loathing. Remember the terror.
It's flashbacks to Nam.
And use that to get the booster.
Yeah. I think I saw something pass by my
Flashbacks
browser
to Nam, yeah.
this week. Like, some new variant could be, could rear its head. It could
do stuff.
Could be as bad as some shit like that.
Something.
Speed of science. It's like science is whatever.
I'm moving at the speed of science here.
At every level, it's whatever. Putin's schooling people on some basic economics in his speeches, hoping that at least the global south can hear him, But when the basics are so abused in every sector, in every field, that's what you're talking to. You can't even talk to these people. Like, price cap will cause chaos. You yourself will be hurt by it. Let's do it.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, it's like, well, that's interesting. We did that, and it had a boomerang effect on us. Isn't that interesting? And we learned something. This was a learning experience. You can imagine Kamala Harris going up.
That was entirely foreseeable, you mean? It was a learning experience for something that was entirely foreseeable. Like, let's walk in front of that bus just to have the learning experience of what happens when a bus moving at a high rate of speed comes in contact with a human body. Boom. Now, as the person's lying mangled on the ground. Wasn't that a nice learning experience? Aren't you glad you went through that experience? Because there's no way you could have known that bus was going to mangle you before it actually mangled you. And that's how reality works. Yeah. Now, come over to this cliff. Let's see if we can fly. We can't fly. Well, there's no way we could have known that beforehand. There's just a paper here. I'll just leave it almost without comment. Came out start of this month. It was published start of this month, and it's been published, accepted 27th of September 2022. It's from the Institute of Pathology, called George whatever Schmori, in the Municipal Hospital in Dresden, Friedrichstadt, in Dresden, basically. So being approved, all that kind of stuff. Abstract. Well, the title of it is a case report: multifocal necrotizing encephalitis and myocarditis after BNT162b2 mRNA vaccine against COVID-19. That's basically the Pfizer vaccine or the mRNA vaccine against COVID case report. And yeah, it was just, again, one person did an autopsy, because this very seldom happens where they actually do an autopsy on a person who has died officially. Well, in this case, they did an autopsy on a person who had died. He had Parkinson's disease, but when they did an autopsy, they found that, various different things that were not, let's say, necessarily consistent with Parkinson's disease, and also the fact that he had no, I think they said he had, anyway, I'll read a bit of the abstract here. Yeah, so there was no history of COVID-19 for this patient. His immunohistochemistry for SARS-CoV-2 antigens was performed. They found no history of COVID-19, like an infection by the actual virus. Surprisingly, only the spike protein, but no nucleocapsid protein, could be detected within the foci of inflammation in both the brain and the heart, particularly in the endothelial cells of small blood vessels. Since no nucleocapsid protein could be detected, the presence of spike protein must be ascribed to vaccination rather than to viral infection. The findings corroborate previous reports of encephalitis and myocarditis caused by gene-based COVID-19 vaccines. Notice gene-based COVID-19 vaccines. So, the bottom line is, did an autopsy on a guy, a 76-year-old man with Parkinson's disease, and found he has no history, so he had no medical history and no actual, how do they describe it, immunohistochemistry. So they basically looked and they explained it there basically in what I just said, but that the I suppose the biopsies, and they were able to determine that he was not infected with the virus, but they did find the spike protein in his brain and in his heart, which means that he can only have got it from the vaccine, which means that the spike protein, which is basically a toxin, may have, I don't know if they say specifically in the report, but that it may have contributed to his death, specifically via necrotizing encephalitis and myocarditis. Basically, he had both of those. He had necrotizing encephalitis and myocarditis, and they found spike protein in his heart and in his brain. They probably don't go as far as to actually make a connection between the two, but it's circumstantial. It's curious.
So the vaccine killed one old dude who was probably white anyway. It saved millions of lives. Millions.
Yeah.
Millions.
That's what they tell me. Because people never died before from seasonal viruses. Older people with multiple.
Someone asked how old was the patient. I think it said he was 76.
Again, this is something that's hardly ever done, and they don't do this because this would actually, if they did this on a lot of people, obviously it's quite labor intensive and stuff. But if you did a lot more actual autopsies on people who who had fit a profile for possibly, well, certainly have had the vaccine, let's say, you might find this all over the place, and you might start to draw draw conclusions, let's say, from about the possible negative effect of, as they call it, gene-based COVID-19 vaccines. So
the good news is Pfizer's coming out with a new vaccine that prevents myocarditis.
Right.
So you just
get one to prevent the other.
You get a twofer. When you go for your COVID jab, you get the myocarditis one at the same time.
Right.
Using mRNA technology.
But that's entirely in keeping with the pharmaceutical industry and the way that they operate in terms of for pills up until now, which is basically, here's a pill for your condition. It'll just mask the symptoms probably, but here's a pill for your condition. Oh, and take this one
for
to mask the symptoms of the pill of the first one.
Yeah.
So it's not surprising to do that with vaccines as well.
The thing is, it's not always like that.
No,
this is the horrible mess of it all. If it was that a simple heuristic, we could all just safely, and then I suppose there wouldn't be a plausible basis for the censors to crack down on, because you're saying you're anti-science, because you're going to throw the whole baby out with the bathwater and suggest that all vaccines are bad or that all big pharma products are bad. That's not actually the case. The horrible thing is that in specific directions, money-making directions usually, that's when the science is most corrupted.
Yeah.
And most likely to do harms.
I mean, that's like a straw man argument. Like as soon as you say something about a certain
about one thing,
that means
you're anti-vax.
You're anti-medicine. You're anti-allopathic medicine. You're
anti-science,
anti-science. Everything. It's like no. It's like if there's one particular. I mean, has there never been a case where a certain medication produced by a pharmaceutical company had a negative result and had to be withdrawn? Has that never happened before? Maybe once or twice anyway, and so maybe this is. Am I not allowed to say maybe that's the case in this one? Maybe we should be careful in this one since there's new technology, never been rolled out in vast numbers of people before, and in fact, in this particular case of vaccines, the proper clinical trial period was shortened down to like 2% of the normal, and the actual clinical trial is being conducted live on 1 billion people. Would that be? Is that cause for caution and maybe just a word of caution, or maybe raising my hand and saying maybe don't take 4 of these a year?
This episode of NewsReal was brought to you by Pfizer.
Yes.
Okay, we're at the 2-hour mark. Anything else?
No. No, I'm moving at the speed of science here, so no.
Any comments on British politics?
Up the ra.
Up the ra. The two Alexes at the Duran reckon a coup is on the way of sorts.
A coup of what?
To force out Truss.
Oh, yeah. Well,
a month in.
Wouldn't be hard. That's a joke.
And
She-
to force
she
a
is-
general election that would bring Kerch-Crimea to power. Why? Because he will deliver the population control the deep state demands.
Do you know?
Not bad theory.
Do you know in the Second World War?
Sure, yeah.
The Second World War, when just before we finish, Second World War, America financed the warring parties. In some cases, both sides, but actually documented both sides. But certainly the allies in Europe, European allies in World War, America, loads of
Granddaddy
equipment,
Bush.
yeah. Weaponry, and money. End result: a lot of European economies bankrupt and in massive debt to America for the next decades and decades. In fact, Germany, I think 2011, they stopped paying off their debt from World War II back to America. So as a result of World War II and America's essential financing of World War II for Europe, and then them having to being in debt economically, obviously, and politically to America, America had a pretty good time of it, right, and rose to prominence in that period from the Second World War until today. Is there any difference is there much of a difference in what they're doing today? Is the dynamic pretty much the same?
Yeah, I
because you're
think so.
seeing Europe kind of effectively in the process of being bankrupted, at least from an energetic point of view, and America benefiting. Are Europeans doing exactly more or less the same thing in the same dynamic as European countries were in World War II? Except this time we're not fighting any Nazis. We're fighting for the Nazis.
Yeah, there are a few differences,
Bit of
but
flip.
there's a underlying dynamic that's going the same way, 100%.
We don't learn from history,
It's
yeah?
nuts. Is it planned that way, or it might just be a function of the type of
History repeats.
what I was going to say, the type of class ruling in the United States.
Stupid people repeat.
Well, they're not stupid; they're cunning.
Psychos repeat.
Yeah,
Close enough.
yeah. But the
Second.
Russians know. That's why everything is. As much as I say Putin talks about values and that's why we're doing it, he probably also has this kind of global picture in mind as to why. No, not again.
Yeah.
Not this time.
Yeah.
But that's too bad for Western Europe.
Yeah. Yeah, Liz Truss, the only thing I would say about Liz Truss is that Liz Truss is like the stupidest woman in England. No, she's not probably the stupidest woman, but Liz Truss was picked because the Conservatives, or the establishment in the UK, always picks a Prime Minister who is very compliant, very malleable, very controllable, basically. In the same way there's a deep state / Washington establishment in the US, there's a career bureaucrats who really run the show, domestic and foreign policy in the UK, and they pick the most pliable, malleable person to be Prime Minister. They picked a real doozy this time. So it may not be tenable for her to actually stay, I think, because she has no mind of her own, basically. It's people around her making decisions, and she's not in the Times today. Don't worry, Liz Truss is still in charge, because everybody thinks she's not in charge anymore. She never was. She's only been there. So it could be like the fourth. 1, 2, Boris, Truss, third. We could have a third Prime Minister.
May.
Was she this year? Not this year though.
May was 20.
No, it was last year. So 3 prime ministers, but there's been 4 chancellors already in the last 6 weeks, i.e. Economics minister, let's say, economy minister.
I think it may actually have been that she tried to strike out something that they didn't like, something independent. Because her mini budget plan, you notice that Kwarteng was the target of that, her chancellor.
She didn't make it.
And he was sacked while he was in Washington away. And what happened was the Duran guys explained it. The Bank of England put out statements basically completely undermining his budget idea, which was to slash taxes across the board. That's a kind of a Thatcherite attempt to give the economy a boost. And this idea is not... She thought she was doing what master wants, because that's the way the pattern has been. Always liberalized, give capitalism a boost. This is the British / American way, isn't it? No, not anymore. Now it's like
Squeeze
Biden even commented as well, slashing the tax rate. No, what are you doing? You can't do that. So he piped up too. Apparently she was not clued in to, no, the agenda is the opposite. Do not freeing anyone from any taxes.
Right.
We're keeping taxes locked in. There's no plan to lift the economy.
What actually
they
happened
want
was,
it where it is. Depressed.
But what actually happened was she only got rid of the 45% tax.
It was
rate
watered down.
For the big earners, like, so it was seen as a sop to the rich, basically cut taxes for them the 45% tax rate, and not for anybody else. I don't know, and I didn't hear, at least officially or publicly, anything about tax breaks across the board for everybody. It was just for the elite, and but even that was a problem because it was unfinanced. Where are you going to get the money from? That's missing because of these taxes you're going to cut. Where's the money coming from? She didn't have anywhere. But again, she seems to have been totally on the side of all this. You know what I mean? She's just taking the hit for it, and she's like, I don't know what's happening.
Yeah.
People were telling me to do stuff, and I said okay.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Yeah. But I just love the way that the Bank of England has steps in twice.
Well, yeah.
There's a whole load of Western history packed into this just little episode. The Bank of England was the first central bank, and one of the core premises of it is that it must be politically independent, in quotes, from the government at all times. It created this after the Glorious Revolution of 17th century, and it was the first, and every other one that since then has been modeled on that. And that's a core tenet of a properly functioning country, usually a democracy, right? That they're politically independent, so no matter who comes in and buys the power, they don't just get to completely change the trajectory and especially the control of money and the stable, smart management for the greater good, right? Well, then this this nominally independent thing intervenes politically using finance talk in a way that collapses the government. Almost. Probably going to. We'll see. Chancellor's gone. It's all gone wrong in Spectre because the old way of doing things is not working as well as it used to, you know. And
there's a new paradigm. We're in the end game.
Yeah,
it's all bets are off. We're shaking it up. We got to prepare for hard times ahead. Winter is coming.
Yeah.
Yep. Anyway, I think we'll leave it the rest of this week, folks. We've been on for more than 2 hours at this point, and I'm sure you've had enough, because we have, of dealing with this madness. But we'll be back next week with another one on whatever madness has been going on between now and then. So thanks for watching, listening. Thanks for commenting. Don't forget to smash all the like buttons. And yeah, have a good one, and see you next time.
Thanks for watching.
Can't stop the signal now.